On May 21, 1995, a seaplane carrying one of the richest men in the Pacific crashed into the ocean. 2 bodies were pulled from the wreckage, but the billionaire? Gone. And then investigators made a discovery at his mansion that would spark one of the most bizarre legal battles in history, and a conspiracy theory that refuses to die 30 years later. The weather wasn't great that evening. Larry Hillblom and 2 others were heading back to Saipan after a failed trip to explore volcanic ash deposits on Pagan Island. The vintage Seaplane, a World War II-era Republic RC-3CB, was 45 miles north of Saipan when something went wrong. Search teams found the wreckage. They recovered the body of the pilot, Robert Long. They found Jesus Mafnas, a government official. But Larry Hillblom? Nothing. Just pieces of the plane scattered across the Pacific. About a quarter of the aircraft was eventually pulled from the water, but the man who owned it had vanished completely. Here's what made this crash different from just another tragic accident. Larry Hillblom wasn't just anyone. He was the H in DHL. That's right, the shipping company you've probably used or at least seen everywhere. The man had built a multi-billion-dollar empire from absolutely nothing. Born in 1943 in Kingsburg, California, Hillblom grew up on a peach farm. Nothing about his childhood screamed future billionaire. He worked his way through college, went to law school at UC Berkeley, and while his classmates were busy dreaming about becoming lawyers, Hillblom was delivering packages to pay his tuition. That's when he noticed something. December 1969. Matson Navigation Company just launched these new, incredibly fast container ships running between California and Hawaii. The ships were cutting days off delivery times. Great for business, right? Except there was a problem. The shipping documents couldn't possibly arrive by regular mail before the actual cargo showed up. Companies were going to receive shipments without any paperwork telling them what they were getting. Most people would have seen a problem. Hillblom saw an opportunity. His solution was brilliantly simple. He bought airline tickets for passengers who could carry 350 pounds of baggage. He'd stuff the documents in suitcases, send them along with the passengers, and boom, papers arrive when the ships do. Other companies heard about this and wanted in, so Hillblom teamed up with Adrian Dalsey and Robert Lynn. They took the first letters of their last names and created DHL. The company exploded. We're talking faster than FedEx, which wouldn't even exist for another 2 years. By the time Hillblom eventually bought out his partners, he was worth billions. With a B. But wealth does strange things to people. And in the early 1980s, Hillblom decided he was done with the United States. Or more specifically, done with US taxes. He moved to Saipan, a tiny island in the northern Mariana Islands, technically a US territory, but with much friendlier tax laws. The kind of place where a billionaire could live and keep most of his fortune away from the IRS. Saipan became Hillblom's kingdom. He wasn't just living there, he was building an empire. Hotels in Vietnam, real estate in the Philippines, a $40 million restoration of the Dalat Palace Hotel, cable television companies, banks. The man even became a judge on the Micronesian Supreme Court. He had his fingers in everything, and he loved to fly. Vintage planes were his obsession. In 1993, he crashed one near Saipan and barely survived. Lost an eye. Needed extensive facial reconstructive surgery. Most people would have stopped flying after that. Not Hillblom. He got right back in the cockpit. Which brings us back to May 21st, 1995. The crash, the missing body, and what investigators were about to discover when they went to search his home for answers. Because this wasn't going to be a simple case of a wealthy man dying in an accident. This was about to become something nobody could have predicted. When someone dies, especially someone worth hundreds of millions of dollars, lawyers and investigators need to establish identity beyond any doubt. Standard procedure. Except nothing about what happened next was standard. A team showed up at Hillblom's mansion in Saipan looking for DNA samples. Simple stuff, really. A toothbrush, a hairbrush, maybe some clothing, anything that might have traces of his genetic material. What they found instead was nothing. The house had been scrubbed clean. And I don't mean someone did a good job tidying up. I mean forensically cleaned. Every toothbrush, gone. Every comb, every hairbrush, every piece of clothing, vanished. The bathroom sinks had been scrubbed down with muriatic acid. That's industrial strength stuff. The kind of chemical you use when you really, really don't want anything found. The lead investigator walked through room after room, opening drawers, checking closets. Empty. It was like nobody had ever lived there. For a man who'd called this place home for over a decade, there wasn't a single trace of Larry Hillblom's existence. Then things got weirder. Hillblom's longtime girlfriend eventually came forward with a story. She claimed that someone had instructed her to clean the house top to bottom. Get rid of everything. Use bleach on the shower walls. Vacuum thoroughly. Even clean out the lint filter in the dryer. Everything that might contain a single hair, a single cell of DNA, wiped away. But here's where it gets really interesting. 3 years later, in 1998, someone got a tip about Hillblom's backyard. They brought in a backhoe and started digging near the tennis courts. Sure enough, they found trash bags, lots of them, buried in the ground like hidden treasure. Inside those bags, all of Hillblom's missing belongings, the clothes, the shoes, the personal items, everything that had vanished from the house was right there, underground. Except there was one problem. Every single item had been washed, laundered clean, useless for DNA testing. Now, you might be wondering why any of this mattered. Hillblom was dead. The plane crashed. 2 bodies were recovered. Case closed, right? Wrong. Because Hillblom had a will. Written back in 1982, 13 years before the crash. In that will, he left $300,000 to each of his 2 brothers. Everything else, every last dollar of his fortune, went to a charitable trust. The main beneficiary? The University of California, San Francisco. We're talking about an estate valued somewhere between $400 million and possibly over $1 billion, all designated for medical research. Sounds generous, sounds straightforward. Except Hillblom made one crucial mistake. His will never mentioned children. It didn't say, "I have no children." It didn't say, "I'm leaving my children nothing." It simply didn't acknowledge children at all. That might not seem like a big deal until you understand the law in the Northern Mariana Islands. Under their probate system, any child, doesn't matter if they're born inside or outside of marriage, has first rights to their father's estate. The law actually overrides whatever the will says. If you're proven to be someone's biological child and that will was written before you were born, you can claim your share, potentially the entire estate. And that's exactly when women started coming forward. Women from the Philippines, from Vietnam, from Palau. One after another, they appeared with photographs, with stories, and with children. They all claimed the same thing: Larry Hillblom was the father. The battle for one of the largest fortunes in the Pacific was about to begin. The first woman to step forward was Kailani Kinney from Palau. She had a 12-year-old son named Junior Larry Hillblom. Yes, Hillblom, she'd misspelled it on the birth certificate, but the claim was clear. She said she'd met Hillblom when she was 16 and that he was the father. Hillblom's own lawyer had always insisted the boy wasn't his, but now Hillblom was gone and couldn't deny anything. Then came Julie Quartero from the Philippines. She had a 1-year-old daughter named Jillian, born just before Hillblom died. Another woman, Mercedes Feliciano, claimed her daughter was born 7 months after the crash. A woman from Vietnam came forward with a young child named Lori Nguyen. Eventually, 8 different claimants emerged from across Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. The estate offered Kinney $17 million to settle. She said no, because if these children could prove their paternity, they weren't entitled to $17 million. Under the law, they were entitled to everything, but proving paternity requires DNA, and that's where everyone hit a wall. The lawyers went back to that cleaned-out mansion. They knew about the 1993 plane crash, the one where Hillblom nearly died and needed reconstructive surgery. Blood would have been everywhere at that crash site. They sent investigators to the old wreckage. When the team arrived, they were told blood had been visible all over the plane. But when they actually examined it, not a single drop. Someone had cleaned that too. Then someone had an idea. During Hillblom's facial reconstruction at UCSF Medical Center, Doctors had removed a mole from his face. Medical facilities keep tissue samples. If that mole still existed in storage, it would have Hillblom's DNA. Problem solved. UCSF found the sample. They agreed to release it. Except then they admitted something awkward. They'd accidentally mixed up Hillblom's tissue sample with someone else's. They later claimed they'd sorted it out and found the right one, but the chain of custody was broken. Nobody trusted it anymore. That potential smoking gun was worthless. So the children's lawyers tried a different approach. They asked Hillblom's mother and brother to provide DNA samples. Close relatives share genetic markers. Testing them could help establish whether these children were actually related to the Hillblom family. The family refused. Completely. That's when attorney David Lujan came up with something brilliant. He realized you don't necessarily need the father's DNA. If these 8 children really did have the same father, their DNA would show it. They'd share specific genetic markers that couldn't be explained any other way. The children were scattered across different countries, born to different mothers who'd never met each other. If their genes matched up in the right ways, that was proof. Lujan dispatched a team across the Pacific. They collected DNA samples from all 8 claimants. The samples went to Dr. Charles Brenner, one of the leading geneticists in the country. The data got run through specialized computer programs designed to detect family relationships. Meanwhile, the lawyers went back to court and this time demanded that Hillblom's mother and brother submit to testing. A judge agreed. He ordered them to provide samples whether they wanted to or not. Spring of 1998, 3 years after the crash. The results finally came back. 4 of the 8 children shared enough genetic markers that there was virtually no doubt. They had the same father. The probability that it was anyone other than Larry Hillblom? Astronomically low, 1 in 100,000. The children nobody wanted to acknowledge had just won the genetic lottery. The settlement came that summer. Each of the 4 proven children, Junior Larry Hillblom from Palau, Lori Nguyen from Vietnam, and Jelian Quartero and Mercedita Feliciano from the Philippines, received $90 million. After taxes and legal fees, each walked away with about $50 million. The remaining $240 million went to the Hillblom Foundation, which used it for medical research at the University of California, just like the will had specified. These kids had grown up in poverty. They'd never met their father. They didn't even know who he was until after he disappeared. And suddenly they were multimillionaires because of groundbreaking DNA science that proved what their mothers had been saying all along. But here's what nobody can stop talking about 30 years later. That cleaned house. Those buried, laundered belongings. The acid-scrubbed sinks. The missing blood from the crash site. The destroyed mole sample. Every single piece of physical evidence that could prove Larry Hillblom existed, systematically eliminated. Some people think it was the estate executors trying to prevent paternity claims, protect the inheritance for the university, make it impossible for any children to prove their case. That makes sense from a legal strategy standpoint, even if it's morally questionable. But others ask a different question. What if Larry Hillblom cleaned it all himself? What if he knew those paternity claims were coming and decided the easiest solution wasn't to fight them in court, but to simply disappear? Think about it. The man was obsessed with avoiding taxes. He'd already fled the United States to hide his wealth. He had properties all over the world, money stashed in offshore accounts, business connections across Asia, the resources to vanish if he wanted to. He was an aviation expert who'd survived 1 plane crash already. The 1993 crash had even changed his appearance with all that reconstructive surgery, making him harder to identify. The timing is suspicious too. Right when these women and their children were about to come forward, his plane happens to go down. 2 bodies get recovered, but not his. Only a quarter of the plane is ever found. In the vastness of the Pacific Ocean, with enough planning, could someone survive a controlled crash? But then you have to ask yourself, where is he? 30 years, not a single confirmed sighting, no mysterious bank transactions, no slips, no leaks, no deathbed confessions from anyone who might have helped him. That's a long time to stay hidden, even for a billionaire. The courts declared him legally dead. His estate was settled. The children got their DNA-proven inheritance. The foundation has donated over $130 million to medical research since 1996. There are research centers at UCLA and UCSF named after him. Life moved on, except the question won't die. Did Larry Hillblom's body sink to the bottom of the Pacific that night, or did he orchestrate one of the most elaborate disappearing acts in modern history? We'll probably never know for certain. The ocean keeps its secrets. And maybe that's exactly what Hillblom was counting on. What we do know is this: a farm kid from California built a global empire, lived like a king on a remote island, and then vanished under circumstances so strange that people are still arguing about it 3 decades later. Whether he's gone or hiding somewhere under a new identity, Larry Hillblom left behind one hell of a mystery. And that mansion in Saipan? Still standing, still empty of answers,